welcome back to another Daily Dose of History. Let's just dive right on into today's topic. In order to best understand what we're going to be talking about today, we kind of need to understand what the timeline of events were during this era. Today, as you've no doubt seen from the title of this video, we're going to be talking about the Articles of Confederation, better known as the United States of America's first attempt at forming a government. So let's walk through this timeline here, and then we'll open up the text to add more to it. As we know, the colonists officially declared their independence from Great Britain in 1776, which was a year after the Revolutionary War started. And just recently we learned that although fighting still happened, the war was officially over when Great Britain signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783. But what you might notice is that the government we're going to be talking about today was actually created during the war and not after it. And that's actually really important to keep in mind as we go through today's video. So let's open up the text and see what it has to say. After declaring independence from Great Britain, the Second Continental Congress approved a document called the Articles of Confederation. This Congress managed the war against Great Britain. It also worked to solve common problems. The Congress could declare war and pass laws, but the laws had to be approved by at least 9 of the 13 states. The new government had no president and no court to settle disputes between states. Essentially, this form of government that Congress created was kind of like a last resort government. Even though the new country was labeled the United States of America, all 13 of these states were still pretty independent from each other. They all kind of had their own unique way of doing things and weren't united with a strong central government. For example, we just read that there was no true leader or court, which we know are things that we have in our government today. And so because of this, Congress had some issues that they had to deal with. Once the American Revolution ended, the Confederation Congress had a hard time solving the new country's problems. Most of the powers were held by the states. Each state still issued its own money, and the Congress had no power to collect taxes or even to force the states to give its funds. It could not support a national army to protect American citizens or pay the soldiers who had fought in the war. Here's where we start unpacking that united but still individual concept a little bit more. We know that one of the jobs of a government is to collect tax money in order to fund common goods and services. But the problem is, how can you do that when there's 13 individual systems? And worse yet, if all 13 of these states are independently distributing their own money, then how is the central government supposed to pay for the national army? So why is this a problem? Well, aside from collecting taxes, governments also play a major role in national security. During this time, the Continental Army, which was formed by the government, had just finished fighting a war and were looking to get paid. Except that this government-created army came from all over the states and not just one central place. So can you see now how the lack of a central government could be a problem? They can't pay the soldiers because the 13 states are still too independent from one another despite the name being United States of America. It doesn't take a world-class detective to draw the conclusion that this could cause a lot of problems with the American citizens. Many former soldiers and poor farmers lost their homes because they could not pay their bills. Some of them were jailed. One farmer complained, "The great," meaning rich, "men are going to get all we have, and I think it is time for us to rise and put a stop to it." So what we have here is a group of Americans that are complaining about how a government is treating them. Hold on here. Didn't we just talk about this concept like 3 weeks ago? Why is this happening again? Can the Americans not complain for like 2 seconds? To be fair though, they kind of had the right idea in this instance. Because this first form of government wasn't nearly as strong as it should be, it did cause a lot of problems for the American citizens. But to be fair to Congress, they were literally making it up as they went. This is a brand new country, and if they want it to last and stay independent, they needed to get this thing right. When was the last time you tried something brand new that was also incredibly difficult and succeeded the first time? And no doubt some of you are already hollering out some of the accomplishments that you have done, which is great, but have you ever created a government that has lasted over the last 200 years? I don't think so. Congress was liable to mess things up. They're in brand new territory here, and their citizens are liable to create problems as a result of those mistakes. For example, in Massachusetts, a former soldier named Daniel Shay agreed. He and hundreds of other men took part in an armed revolt, attempting to stop the state courts from taking people's property. Their fight against the government became known as Shay's Rebellion. So some quick background information on this Daniel Shay guy. He actually fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill, which we know the colonists lost, but it also gave them a ton more confidence and motivation to fight battles that have insurmountable odds. And so he's definitely got that fire within him to lead this sort of rebellion. And the founding fathers saw the result of all this violence that was taking place and decided that they need a more central and stronger united government in order to fix these things. After all, they just finished fighting a war, and the last thing they need is their own country turning against themselves. So it's probably a good thing they weren't around in 1861. For now though, let's crack open those workbooks and jot down a few things about this first failed attempt at forming a government. We're going to be on page 86, writing in section number 1. Before I put the rest of the notes up on the screen, we're just going to go ahead and fill in this first blank here. The Articles of Confederation were like the poorly constructed toothpick and marshmallow structure I first created in yesterday's video. Congress called it something similar to a one-legged stool. And now below that first sentence is a space for us to write some of the problems that the Articles of Confederation had. I know the instructions say to at least list 3, but we're going to actually add a little bit more to it, so make sure you have some room when you're writing. And remember, as I'm going through these notes, feel free to pause the video so you can make sure you write them all down. The first problem with the Articles of Confederation is that it was an overall weak central government. Because of this, making laws was difficult as 9 out of the 13 states needed to approve them. But even if the laws were passed, there was no president to lead the government or a court to settle the various disputes between the states. Remember, all the states were still independently run at the time. And this leads us to the 5th point. With all the independent states, the government had no power to collect taxes from the states and citizens, which was a problem because without that money, they couldn't support an army. So overall, it looks like Congress has some kinks to work out with this government here. But you know what they say, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first. It took a few years for the US to figure out what kind of government would work for them, but for us, we only have to wait 24 hours because that's the topic of tomorrow's video. And so guys, that's going to do it for today's daily dose of history. Be sure to head back to the Google Classroom and answer our question of the day. And be sure to tune in tomorrow so we can figure out just what Congress did to fix those mistakes they caused in today's video. And lastly, here's your daily reminder that your states and capitals quiz is May 29th, which is just over 2 weeks away. So if you haven't already, now would be a good time to start studying those maps. But with that being said, I'll see you right here tomorrow.